I had checked into a moderately priced hotel for a solo weekend getaway. The room was cozy, but the antique furnishings and dim lighting created an atmosphere that seemed to whisper forgotten stories. I wasn't the superstitious type, but the old building did have a certain eerie charm. The evening was uneventful as I dined alone in the hotel restaurant and then returned to my room. Rain lashed against the window pane, and the steady patter on the glass soon began to lull me into drowsiness. Just as I was on the verge of drifting into sleep, I was jolted awake by a sudden noise. It was a banging, like heavy footsteps stomping down the hallway. I pulled the covers tighter around me, straining to listen, wondering if I was the only one hearing it. The sounds came closer, growing louder and more frantic. I couldn't ignore it any longer, so I got out of bed and approached the door. As I peered through the peephole, I saw a man walking down the hallway, his face obscured by shadows. His steps were unsteady, and he was muttering to himself incoherently. It was a troubling sight. My heart raced, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The man didn't seem to be a guest who had perhaps had too much to drink. There was an air of disarray about him that sent shivers down my spine. His presence alone was disturbing. I had locked the door when I entered the room, but I quietly slid the security chain into place just to be safe. The man was still wandering the hallway, pausing at random doors as if he were searching for something or someone. My mind raced with questions and fears. Why was he behaving like this? Should I call the front desk? Was he dangerous, or was he merely lost in his own world? Then, as quickly as he had appeared, he turned and began to walk away. I exhaled in relief, thinking that he would soon disappear into the maze of the hotel's hallways. But my relief was short-lived. In the dim light, I saw him stop just a few doors down from mine, outside another guest's room. He seemed to fumble with something, and before I could react, the door to that room creaked open. The guest inside must have been as shocked as I was, because a muffled gasp of surprise reached my ears. The man staggered into the room, and the door swung shut behind him. Panic surged through me. My first instinct was to pick up the phone and call the front desk to report the incident. I struggled to remain as calm as possible, explaining the situation to the hotel staff. The receptionist promised to send security immediately. All I could do was wait and hope that the situation would be resolved without further incident. Every second felt like an eternity as I stood by the door, straining to hear any sounds from the neighboring room. It was only a matter of minutes before I heard muffled voices in the hallway and the reassuring sound of the security team approaching. After a brief confrontation, the man was led away, his protests growing fainter as they receded down the hallway. The following morning, I couldn't help but feel shaken. I had so many unanswered questions. Who was that man? What had driven him to act so erratically? I decided to speak with the hotel manager, hoping to shed some light on the situation. The manager explained that the man had been a guest at the hotel for several days. He had checked in under an alias, and nobody suspected that he would cause any trouble. It seemed he had a mental health crisis, which explained his strange behavior. He had been removed from the premises and would receive the necessary help. Though I was relieved to hear that he had not posed a direct threat, the encounter had left me deeply unsettled. I couldn't help but wonder about the thin line that separated safety and danger in the most unexpected places. The rest of my stay passed without incident, and I returned home, eager to leave that unsettling hotel behind. The night was cold, and we were exhausted. My wife and I had been driving for hours after attending a wedding in a distant town. The winding, deserted road stretched out before us, and fatigue was beginning to take its toll.
The GPS showed no signs of civilization for miles, and the promise of sleep was a siren's call. Just as desperation started to seep in, a flickering neon sign pierced the darkness. Motel vacancy. It seemed like a mirage, but there it was, the one thing we needed. We pulled into the motel's dimly lit parking lot, greeted by a few flickering bulbs and the low hum of the neon sign. The receptionist was a stern woman with an air of indifference. She didn't ask for IDs or any questions, just handed us an old metal key with a tag that read Room 6. We didn't care about the lack of charm. All we wanted was a comfortable bed. The room, once we entered, was a time capsule from the 70s, complete with shag carpet and floral wallpaper. It was stingy, but not unbearable, and we didn't mind. It was a roof over our heads, and that's all that mattered. Hours passed, and we drifted into a deep sleep, the events of the wedding day fading away. The room was silent, the only sound the occasional rumble of a passing truck on the distant highway. Then, a sudden, forceful knock shattered the stillness. My wife and I jolted awake, disoriented, unsure if we had heard correctly. But the second knock was even louder, more insistent, and we knew it was real. I stumbled to my feet and made my way to the door, my wife pulling the bedsheet around herself in anxious anticipation. I asked who it was, but there was no reply, just another relentless knock. With a sense of unease, I cracked the door open, and my heart nearly stopped in my chest. Before me stood a man, tall and disheveled, his face twisted into a malevolent smile. He was a stranger, and his presence was danger. I felt a rush of panic and confusion. His voice was cold and detached, and he spoke with a bizarre intensity that made my skin crawl. He claimed to be the owner of the motel, but that couldn't have been true. The woman at the front desk was the one who had checked us in, not this sinister figure. My wife and I exchanged nervous glances, our instincts screaming at us to get out of there. The man's demeanor grew increasingly erratic as he continued to speak, his words making little sense. He seemed to revel in our discomfort, shifting his weight from foot to foot, the grin on his face growing ever more unsettling. As my wife and I exchanged whispers, we realized we needed to escape this eerie confrontation. It was an old motel, and the layout was straightforward. We decided to make a run for it, heading straight for the car. As we exited the room and sprinted toward the car, the eerie laughter echoed through the parking lot. Fear propelled us forward. We fumbled with the car keys, and I could sense his presence closing in. The engine roared to life, and we sped away from that dreadful place, leaving the sinister man and the grim motel far behind. We drove through the night, adrenaline coursing through our veins, putting as much distance between us and that chilling encounter as possible. We never reported the incident, but we couldn't erase the memory of that man's wicked grin or the way he spoke. It left us with a lingering sense of dread that still haunts our late-night drives.
It was a quiet, desolate night in the small motel I owned on the outskirts of town. The low glow of a flickering neon sign was the only source of light in the vicinity, casting eerie shadows that danced across the asphalt. The motel, with its faded exterior, had seen better days, but it was a place for weary travelers to rest their heads on a lonely stretch of highway. I was going about my usual late-night duties, making sure the place was in order and everything was set for any guests who might arrive. The motel had a reputation for being somewhat shabby, attracting a mix of travelers who preferred anonymity. That night, two men fitting the description walked through the door. Shifty characters, to say the least. One was tall and thin, with long, greasy hair that seemed to have not seen shampoo in weeks. The other was shorter and stockier,
with a scruffy beard and a look that could make anyone uneasy. They approached the front desk, their eyes shifting around the dimly lit lobby. They requested a room, and I, with a growing sense of unease, signed them in and handed over the keys. As they walked to their room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Deferred glances and hushed tones sent shivers down my spine, but I tried to push aside my apprehensions. Perhaps they were just tired travelers, nothing more. Several hours passed in eerie silence, the motel's vacancy making it feel like a ghost town. I was in my small office, catching up on some paperwork, when I heard a series of muffled thuds and hushed whispers. My curiosity piqued, I decided to investigate. I stepped outside the office and found myself heading towards the room the two men had checked into. As I reached the door, the sounds from inside became clearer. It was not just whispers, but harsh, angry voices. My hand trembled as I raised it to knock on the door, but the words exchanged inside stopped me in my tracks. "You need to finish the job," one voice demanded. "I can't, it's too risky," the other replied. "What if someone hears or sees?" My heart raced, and a cold sweat covered my forehead. The implication was chilling, and the knots in my stomach tightened. It was becoming increasingly clear that I had stumbled upon something sinister. The men continued their hushed conversation. As I strained to listen, I caught words like money, disposal, and body. Panic set in. I knew I had to act, but I also know that I had to do so discreetly. I retreated to my office and called the police, providing them with as much information as I could. Fear gripped me as I relayed the situation, aware that my involvement might place me in danger. I was instructed to stay in my office and avoid any further contact with the men until the authorities arrived. Minutes felt like hours as I awaited the police. My mind raced, imagining the horrifying scenarios that could be unfolding in the room next door. The guilt of not acting sooner had weighed heavily on me. Finally, the piercing sirens of a police car broke the stillness of the night. Multiple units arrived, and I guided them to the room of the two men. With guns drawn, they entered the room and chaos ensued. Shouts and scuffling sounds filled the air. After what felt like an eternity, the police emerged from the room escorting the two men in handcuffs. It turned out that they had been involved in illegal activities, which included the handling of illicit substances and disputes that had turned violent. The situation had been perilous, but the authorities had prevented the potential for greater harm. As they were led away, the men shot me menacing glares, promising revenge. The motel had become a hub of police activity, and the night seemed never-ending. When the dust finally settled and the motel once again grew quiet, I couldn't help but think about how close I had come to a chilling and life-threatening encounter. The line between ordinary motel owner and unwitting accomplice had blurred in the darkness of that fateful night.